Welcome, everyone. I'm Jay Gershman. Thank you for joining us for our Solomon Society conversation with Congressman Ted Deutch, moderated by Dennis House. I'm part of the Solomon Society leadership, along with my friends Ron Cipriano, Coleman Levy, and Eric Zaks. As you know, Solomon Society recognizes men who give $5,000 or more in their own name to the Federation. You are the backbone of our Federation, and you'll hear from our CEO, David Warren. Your incredible generosity makes it possible for us to meet community needs, including very unexpected ones, as we had last year, year after year. We're all very grateful for what you've done for us. Now, please, I want to turn it over to David Warren for a brief update.
A brief update. All right, Jay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jay, Ron, Coleman, Eric, the leadership of the Solomon Society. You've done an amazing job in the last year, really developed and grown this society, and it's contributed hundreds of thousands of dollars to our campaign and to our agencies and to our community. We're grateful. Last night, many of us heard President Biden describe the challenges we all face as a nation: social service needs, economic distress, strategic threats, rising extremism. These are the issues and more facing our congressional leaders. These are the issues being covered by Dennis and his colleagues every day. And many of these issues, as we know, have implications for our Jewish community here in Greater Hartford, in Israel, and around the globe. I'm reminded of an incident I was involved in about 20 years ago that in many ways foreshadowed the emboldened nature of extremism today, and also speaks to the ways in which we here at Federation are dealing with many of these challenges. I received word, so I was the ADL director in St. Louis 20 years ago, and we received word that a branch of the KKK decided to participate in the Missouri Adopt a Highway program. They filed their application and they picked like the I-91 of St. Louis, the major north-south artery. And St. Louis is a community, as we know, with a legacy of racism, of segregation, but this issue really woke almost everybody up. The community was up in arms. The state of Missouri was up in arms. They decided to challenge this in court. They filed cases at a variety of levels up to the Supreme Court. Our lawyers at the time looked at it and said they're not going to win, right? This was a freedom of speech issue. The government creates a forum. They can't decide that ADL or Federation speech is fine and the KKK's is not. And in fact, they lost. Instead, what we did was to mobilize our allies for collective action. So it was ADL, the Urban League, and the National Conference for Community and Justice worked together to develop a response, to galvanize the community. And the response really focused on three things. The first, around the time of this incident, MLK Day fell. And that year, Janet Reno was scheduled to come into St. Louis and speak at the old courthouse on the banks of the Missouri River, where the Dred Scott decision was delivered in the 19th century. The coalition worked with the community with leaders, with congressional leaders and others, to deliver the message, and with Janet Reno, of communal disapprobation, that these values are not our values. It's a critical message every time extremism manifests. The second was that the KKK sign went up, and motorists kept running it over, stealing it, getting arrested. We didn't encourage that. Instead, we worked with a graphic arts company, a marketing company, and developed a sign for a giant billboard behind the KKK sign. It's a little KKK sign on the highway, and the giant billboard behind with the message, "Free speech protects everyone, even when they're wrong." So again, it was a very amplified message of rejection from the community. But the last message was the best. We got a call one day, from an FBI agent who I worked closely with, who focused on civil rights work in St. Louis. And he described how he and his wife were up late the night before talking about this, very upset. And she had an idea that he couldn't implement, but he felt our coalition could. And the idea was to rename the entire stretch of highway after a civil rights leader, right? So at that time, St. Louis had the Mark McGuire Highway. This was pre-steroids controversy, so I'm not sure it's still the Mark McGuire Highway, but it was at the time. And so the idea was a civil rights leader. We debated, we discussed, we decided on Rosa Parks, right? What better exemplar in response to the Klan, the power of one person to create change. A bill was introduced in the Missouri legislature. It passed. Governor Carnahan, who then passed away, died in a tragic plane crash shortly thereafter. It was one of the last things that he did, signed it into law. And the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, which was the paper of record in St. Louis, then editorialized that it will be the ultimate historic irony that the KKK will now be janitors on a highway picking up the trash on a highway named after Rosa Parks. So that story, and that highway is still the Rosa Parks Highway. I'm sure the KKK sign is gone, but now every time a child drives by with his parents and sees that Rosa Parks sign, it's a prompt to say, who was Rosa Parks? What's the story? What's the power of one person to reject bigotry and create change? So that's one small story about what some would say turning lemons into lemonade, right? Transforming challenges into opportunities for lasting change. And that's what Federation is doing here on so many fronts. One way is our new security initiative. Congressman Deutch, I know you're very familiar with the Secure Communities Network, SCAN, and you and your congressional colleagues have provided many more resources in the last couple of years. We're working with SCAN, and we will be bringing in a matter of weeks a high-level security director to work with all of our agencies, all of our synagogues, to improve site security, to enhance training, to work with law enforcement, and to access those funds that Congress is appropriating for this. That's one major initiative. A second major initiative is our new Jewish Free Loan Fund. We now have about $250,000 in capital that we did not have a year ago to support those in needs with loans in the highest tradition, in our highest tradition of giving people a hand up rather than a handout. And again, we're now making, just in the last couple of weeks, our first loans. But this is a sustained initiative. COVID-19 led to economic crisis. We responded, but this is now a permanent response. And one more initiative out of many is our new education initiative. We know that the educational structure for our youth can be enhanced here in Greater Hartford, across the country. The number of kids in Hebrew school is greatly diminished from what it was. Their experience is not what it was. And we're working with all the synagogues across the community to totally reimagine Jewish education in a way that is much more efficient and, most importantly, much more impactful. In these and so many other ways, we are turning today's challenges into opportunities to ensure a vibrant, growing Jewish community in our region. Well, of course, transforming challenges into opportunities for lasting change, I know, Congressman Deutch, is also what motivates you and your colleagues, and you're doing that and working to do that on issues that we all care deeply about. In just a moment, Coleman Levy will introduce Congressman Deutch and our friend and moderator, Dennis House. But first, I want to extend our deep gratitude to our friends, Jeff and Robin Landau, who are with us this evening, who are old and dear friends of Congressman Deutch. And we're only here tonight, and the Congressman is here, Jeff and Robin, because of you. So again, our thanks to you. And with that, to Dennis with our appreciation and the Congressman. Coleman, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, David, and thanks for those inspiring news of what's taking place at Federation. It's my honor and my pleasure to introduce our speaker and moderator. U.S. Congressman Ted Deutch is a lifetime champion of Jewish community priorities. The Congressman represents Florida's 22nd district, which consists of the southern Palm Beach County and Broward County, including Parkland, where unfortunately that horrendous school shooting took place just 3 years ago. Ted is the grandson of Jewish immigrants from Belarus, and he has been active in Jewish issues since childhood. from Zionist summer camps to pro-Israel activism at the University of Michigan, to organizing a march on Capitol Hill when he served on the United Jewish Community's National Youth Leadership Cabinet. Today, Congressman Deutch is a significant member of the House. He chairs the House Subcommittee on the Middle East, North Africa, and Global Counterterrorism, as well as the House Ethics Committee. He is also a senior member of the House Judiciary Committee and the co-chair of the Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Antisemitism. He is also, I don't know if he has this much time, the task force he is also the chief whip of the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force. Quite impressive. And we will be hearing from him shortly. Our moderator this evening is Dennis House, who we all know and is presently the chief political anchor for WTNH, more commonly known as News 8, and the host of This Week in Connecticut with Dennis House. And you can all watch that show on Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. on Channel 8. Recently, he has interviewed Vice President Kamala Harris, and to the other extreme, reputed mobster Robert Gentile, and also the Archbishop of Hartford, Leonard Blair, along with many other local and national figures. Dennis began his TV career in 1992 and was co-anchor with Mika Brzezinski and also with Gayle King. Before joining Channel 8, he anchored the evening news and hosted Face the State for many years on FSB Channel 3. Along with that, Dennis has won Emmy Awards and was inducted into the National Academy of Arts and Sciences Silver Circle for his professional and community work. Dennis and his wife, Kara Sundlin, are very active in the community. Dennis sits on the board of the Mandel JCC, and his lovely wife spoke about the Jewish heritage at the Federation's women's program, Living with Intention, in 2018. Please welcome Congressman Ted Deutch and Dennis House, and we greatly appreciate their participating in this exciting Solomon Society group. Take it away, Dennis.
Coleman, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here, and I appreciate Coleman, whom I've known for many years. I know his son, his grandchildren, play football with my kids. So thank you very much for having me here today. And Congressman Deutch, it's a pleasure to have you with us here tonight.
It's my pleasure, Dennis. Before we get started, if I may, I want to say thanks to Coleman for the great introduction. I would be remiss, however, if Dennis, your wife gets a mention for her community involvement. It is only appropriate that I mention that my wife, Jill, is a board member of our own federation and a real community leader in her own right. Also, thanks to Jay and David, that was a really, really inspiring story, which says a whole lot about the power of the community. And it's a story that I look forward to sharing. And the last thing, Dennis, before we get started, Jeff and Robin were acknowledged. I want to make it clear to everyone who's here that the Landaus are such good friends of mine that were it not for COVID, I would actually be there in person with all of you right now. So thanks for having me this way. And it's great to be with you.
Well, Congressman, I like you already because you're very secure in the fact that you are also married to a powerful woman who's smarter than you are, because my wife is much smarter than I am. She is also the daughter of former governor of Rhode Island, one of the first Jewish governors across the nation, Bruce Sundlin. So it's great to have you here, and let's get started. I want to ask you, first of all, because so many people, Trump supporters would say that he was better for Israel than President Biden. So I want you to walk us through sort of the transition, what you've noticed in the difference in the attitude toward Israel among the two administrations.
Sure. Look, there were campaign talking points, which I understand during the campaign, but The one thing that those of us who are longtime supporters of Israel and the U.S.-Israel relationship will acknowledge is that President Trump did some things that were absolutely positive, and we acknowledge them. And the two that stand out, the two that everyone likes to talk about, are worth talking about. As someone who has written multiple letters during my time in Congress, encouraging that the law be followed and the embassy be moved back to Jerusalem, I'm glad that the embassy is now in Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, as it should be. The Abraham Accords, I think, offer an opportunity, not just at this moment, and I hope we'll talk more about it, but on into the future, to completely reshape the Middle East. And that was really significant. The good news is that the Biden administration picks up right where we left off. The embassy is still in Jerusalem. It's not going to go anywhere. The administration has spoken openly about its commitment to normalizing relations with more countries in the Sunni Arab world, which I think will be really significant. We've actually got legislation that will encourage that. I think that's going to be a big step forward. And as we get into the conversation about Iran and Middle East peace and the other issues, the administration is off to what I think is a really important start. We can talk about the substance, but most important is that they are engaged on a very high level and on a regular basis in consultation with Israeli leadership, so that there are no surprises, so that the close relationship that exists between the United States and Israel will only continue to get stronger. And just one last thing, if I may.
Sure.
I know we talk about administration to administration, and that's fair, and we should. But the one thing that's really important is that the U.S. House, as evidenced again just by the more than 300 signatures to a letter that I circulated over the past couple of weeks, confirmed the relationship, strong support for the U.S.-Israel relationship, made clear that we will not accept any suggestion that we should somehow condition aid to our great ally. The relationship in Congress continues to be very strong and very bipartisan.
You know, I realize it's early in his administration. He's only been in office for about 100 days. Have you had any conversations with the president yet about Israel? And when you do, what would you tell him?
I've not had conversations with the president yet. I've spoken with the senior leadership, national security advisor, folks in the State Department, including those who are actively engaged in all of these issues. And I've told them two things consistently. One, we need to continue to realize as we go forward that Israel is the most important ally in the region, one of our closest friends in the world, and that every decision that we make acknowledge that fact and is guided by that fact. But the second is that there be constant communication, not just about the general support for Israel, but given the Jewish community and the deep level of knowledge, and the fact that certainly for all of us on this Zoom, people who are this committed to the community, we're all well into the weeds on these issues, and the administration just needs to explain to us exactly what's happening so that we have an opportunity to interact at that high level that I think we deserve to, because these are issues that we care so much about.
What is the status of the ambassadorship to Israel? I know that sometimes there's a holdover until they're approved. Where does this stand right now?
So I actually brought this up with the White House Monday in a call. We don't yet have an ambassador. They're just rolling out just this week, they rolled out the first group of ambassadors, and there was not an ambassador to Israel named. I think that there will be, my hope is, within the next week or so. And I also hope, frankly, I'm waiting on two other positions. I told them it's important that there be a liaison to the Jewish community, and that we fill the position of anti-Semitism ambassador, which had been a special envoy. Congress acted to elevate the position because of the importance of the topic. And I think those will be coming soon as well.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the Iran deal, because in the previous administration, of course, it came to be under Obama, Biden, about 7 years ago, as I recall. And obviously, we know that the Trump administration was against it. Where does it stand right now? And what are your thoughts on what should be done?
So I was opposed to the original JCPOA, the original Iran deal. I thought given where Iran's economy was, there was an opportunity to strike a better deal. I also, and I think a lot of us who opposed the deal acknowledged at the time that if the deal went forward, Iran was going to comply in the short term, because longer term, as these provisions started to sunset, they would be able to have more advanced centrifuges and acquire more enriched uranium. So that's exactly what happened, which is why I opposed getting out of the Iran deal. Now we're at the point where Iran is enriching well beyond what they're allowed to under the deal, using higher centrifuges. Those sunset clauses that we worried about, those sunsets that we worried were going to happen in a couple years, 5 years, now are happening at the moment. So the negotiations are to find a way to get Iran back into compliance, which will mean the easing of some, but not all. We still need to have leverage. So I think there can be some easing of sanctions if they come into full compliance, and only if they do. But we also need to see the path forward to address to get rid of the sunset provisions, to address their support for terrorism, to make that stop, and to address the ballistic missile program, which poses a really significant threat, not just to us and to Israel, but to our European allies, especially, who are all fully supportive of this effort.
So, Congressman, we're getting a lot of questions in from our viewers here, so I want to take a few of them, and some of them are related to what you've been talking about. Michael Levin wants to know, what is your perspective of the Biden-Netanyahu relationship?
Well, they had one conversation. I think it went well. The president has known Prime Minister Netanyahu for decades. He talks about that relationship regularly. It's open and I think fairly close. The fact is right now, and I'm confident that if there is some way that Bibi is able to put together a government, it will continue to be. If it turns out that there is a different government in Israel with either Prime Minister Bennett or Prime Minister Lapid, or both, as the case may be, rotating, the administration will have good relations there too. Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken, the National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, have been at this long enough. They have close relationships with all of the senior Israeli officials. So I'm sure it will continue to be a good working relationship.
And I want to apologize for looking down to my phone while I'm speaking to you, but that's how I'm getting the questions. So
quite all right.
In the modern world, during these Zoom news conferences,
it's Zoom. Do what you need to do.
That's exactly how it happens. So I want to take this question here from.
I'm just going to think about the fact that you interviewed the vice president and a mobster, and now you're stuck interviewing me. But go ahead.
Well, you know what happened? Kamala Harris came to Connecticut in the month of March, and I was the Connecticut reporter selected to interview her. They only gave me 5 minutes with her, but it was great. I asked her some questions. There were nothing really off limits, although they suggested a few things that I should avoid. And so I did, out of courtesy to the vice president. But it was great that she came here, and we hope to have other visits from her and, of course, the president down the road. I want to ask, well, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but let's get to some of these questions first. Jay Gershman, there's been much discussion and anxiety about President Biden's rather large capital gains tax proposal. Many baby boomers, like myself, he says, are approaching retirement and looking to sell their businesses and now face a potential capital 43% federal tax. What is the likelihood of this passing? And do you support it?
The president spoke last night. He's spoken repeatedly about not having separate rules for work, for income earned from work and income earned from wealth. That said, I think there will be I know there will be an effort to move forward to help pay for the president's plans that will include some change to the capital gains rate. I don't know what that will ultimately be. There are different suggestions. There's some who are focused on the level at above which it will apply. There are others who suggest, and I think this makes sense, that especially as I represent lots of seniors, it's particularly important that rather than doing it based just on dollar limits, that you do treat them separately, perhaps with a earned income rate minus some amount. But it's still early, and I think the general idea the president's trying to get out there is that he wants to be sure that work is rewarded and that people understand that going forward. So it's a little premature to judge how that's going to turn out so early in the process.
As you look at the map of the Middle East and the Persian Gulf area, what's the biggest threat there? Is it Iran?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's as we look at Iran, it's not just Iran as a threat. It's Iran with its tentacles through the support of terrorists that are involved that give them exactly what they've wanted, a place obviously in Iran, but in Iraq and in Syria and in Yemen and all the way across to Lebanon. And that's why it's so important for us to stop the nuclear program, but also to focus on all of the other ways that they're supporting terror. We've got to hold them accountable for those malign activities.
I have another question from Michael Levin. Your thoughts on Israel's duty to provide COVID vaccines to Palestinians, and how is it addressing that responsibility?
Yeah, there are people who are really critical of Israel for not providing vaccines to Palestinians. The fact is, Israel's a sovereign country, like the United States and other countries around the world, looked out for its citizens and worked to vaccinate not just Jewish Israelis, but Israeli Arabs as well, and has been really successful at that. The responsibility for vaccinations in the West Bank under the terms of Oslo rests with the Palestinians, and Israel has now been supportive, and I'm glad to see it, but I think their effort has been consistent with what countries around the world are doing. I'm sorry that there hasn't been a greater focus on what actually governs here, which is still the Oslo Accords.
I have a question now from Diane Costin. Hope I pronounced that right, Diane. Dane, I'm sorry.
Dane
Costin. Sorry about that.
Yeah, and Dane introduced my brother to his wife, so
excellent. That's why I need these glasses on, because without them, it looked like I apologize for that. Why do you think the president was so quick to want to authorize a Palestinian office in Washington and to restart aid?
Two separate issues. There is not yet a Palestinian office in Washington.
Okay.
The PLO office has not reopened. I know there have been a lot of articles about that. It frankly can't reopen pursuant to U.S. law, which hasn't changed. So there's talk of that. I know the Palestinians want that. So that's one issue. It hasn't happened yet. On the issue of aid, the reason that we've restarted aid is because there was never a good reason to withhold the humanitarian assistance that goes to help in the West Bank. This is money that goes to the East Jerusalem Hospital Network, for example, a place that I visited that does really important work for the people of the West Bank. This is money that goes to help take care of people during the pandemic. The last administration stopped that aid from flowing. None of the money goes to the PA to support the funding of terrorists, which is obviously what Taylor Force was meant to stop, and it has. And there are certain carve-outs. The dollars, the humanitarian assistance, especially in the time of the pandemic, serve not just the Palestinians, but that together with the security assistance to the West Bank also help Israel. So I think it was the right decision to start that money flowing again, as long as it's all consistent with U.S. law and the Taylor Force Act, which it is.
I want to talk about gun control legislation for a moment. And we had a shooting, a killing of a 3-year-old boy in the city of Hartford and in the north end of Hartford. And that really captured a lot of attention. And there were some people who said, well, there should be stronger gun control legislation. There are others who say, well, it's not, that wouldn't have prevented his death, that other things need to be done in the cities to keep kids away from violence. What's your opinion on this? And what is the status of gun control legislation right now?
Yeah, Dennis, it's not either or. It just isn't. Sure, there are lots of things we should be doing to invest in communities. And the president talked about this at the White House last week. We should be investing in community violence intervention programs. We should we should be investing in our communities to provide better opportunities. There are lots of things. We should be investing more in mental health and access to mental health. That's all true. But the argument that any one change to the gun laws wouldn't stop any one shooting isn't reason not to go forward. We know that universal background checks are widely supported. They passed the House. They're sitting in the Senate. Your own Senator Murphy is tirelessly working, trying to get the support to pass it. And that will help save lives. Maybe not in one particular instance or another, but there is no doubt that that will help save lives. Getting high capacity magazines, something that I've worked on with Senator Blumenthal, as a matter of fact, would also help to save lives. There's no reason that anyone needs to fire off 50 rounds at a time, except to seek maximum carnage when shooting at humans. So there are red flag laws so that law enforcement can take guns away from dangerous people. These are things that are widely supported and would absolutely save lives. And we need to act on them. The House, as I said, passed background checks. There's more that we need to do. The president, fortunately and rightfully, talked about them last night, and I'm working hard to get them through the House and send it to the Senate.
Thank you. Getting some more questions, and this one from Jay Gershman. There was a segment on 60 Minutes that talked about how China and Russia have infiltrated most of our critical systems, including banking, defense, and utilities. It appears that they have the capabilities to shut down many critical segments of our daily life. Is our country prepared should this come to pass? Are we investing more money in technology to eliminate these risks?
It's a great question. We are aware. We are making significant investments in our cybersecurity capabilities. We are also holding accountable countries that we discover have attacked us, have made cyber attacks. The president was very clear about that in his speech and over the past couple of weeks. And we also have, obviously, we also have offensive capabilities. I do think that there needs to be more done to establish rules so that there is clarity on what an attack like that means and how we respond to what kinds of attacks, and that everyone understands what the reaction might be. And so we need to continue to bulk up our cyber defense, but we also need to be clear about what we're prepared to do if there are further attacks.
Now from Jeremy Pava, would you comment on the administration's efforts to add to the Supreme Court? For a president who promised more bipartisanship, isn't this just a blatant political move? And I will point out that a couple of weeks ago on This Week in Connecticut, I interviewed all 7 members of the Connecticut Supreme Court, and they were, well, some were non-committal, but a majority were against expanding the High Court. What's your opinion on this?
Yeah, the president hasn't committed to do it. The president has talked about putting together a commission to look at it as a possibility. It's going to go on for some time if that happens. There is legislation that some of my colleagues introduced. The speaker has been very clear that that legislation will not come up for a vote. With all of the challenges that we face, I don't believe that the way to respond to those challenges is to add some new Supreme Court justices. I think the way to respond to those challenges is the way the president talked about last night responding, which is coming together as a country to help lift everybody up and provide economic opportunity. So I'm not supportive of that. The speaker's not supportive of that. The president hasn't committed to do that either.
I have a question about, as you know, we are the home state of Joe Lieberman, who was the last Jewish person to be on a major party ticket back in 2000 with Al Gore. As you look at the political landscape out there, who do you see as perhaps rising Jewish political stars who we may see on a national ticket in years to come?
That's such a good question. By the way, I was considering running for my local school board back in 2004, and I went to meet with one of my local political operatives, a guy who'd been involved for a long time, and he said, "That's interesting, but you should come help me elect Joe Lieberman president." And Joe Lieberman wound up. So I got involved in the 2004 campaign when Joe ran for president.
Yeah.
And everyone on this call probably knows Senator Lieberman really loves home hospitality. So he stayed with us one night. It was such a big deal for us that we actually went out and got a new sofa bed so he would have a nice place to sleep. But he stayed over. We stayed up late talking about public service and the experiences that he had. He got up the next morning, and it's not a story I get to tell very often, but it's a Federation event. We were in the month of Elul, just before Rosh Hashanah, and there's custom to blow the shofar every morning, every day, leading up to Rosh Hashanah. And here's a member of the United States Senate who's running for president of the United States. It was enough that he was staying in my house. He then walked out of the bedroom and took his shofar, blew his shofar at our breakfast table where our kids, for the only time in their entire childhood, were sitting quietly with their hands folded in front of them, and then told a little story about why he did that, which again, I tell you only because I can, and
Sure.
You of all people would appreciate it. There's some really good Jewish leaders. I think in the Senate right now, Jackie Rosen, who's a senator from Nevada, is terrific. There are a number of Jewish House members. I'm having a hard time thinking about who might run for president. I'm going to think more about that. One of the reasons I think it's hard is this was such an historic election, with the election of a vice president, first Black vice president, first Asian vice president, first Jewish second gentleman, as the case may be.
Yeah, that's right.
There's so much that's changed. I think it's now easier to think in these terms, certainly more so than when Senator Lieberman was on the ticket and then ran 4 years later. But I'm going to think more about that and get back to you before we're done here.
Do you have any interest in higher office at all yourself?
It's hard to say. I really do like, at the risk of sounding like every politician, I really do like the work I'm doing now. Yeah. If there's an opportunity, I represent Florida. Florida is a big, diverse, challenging state, and so it's hard to imagine giving up what I can do now for that. But with the right opportunity at the right time, we'll see.
And to follow up on that, Jay Gershman, will we have a Jewish president before I die?
Well, I hope Jay should live a good, long, and healthy life, and I would certainly think and hope that that's the case. Again, just because we're now at the point where there's so much has changed, and so many things that were seen as hurdles just aren't anymore, and that gives me real hope as well.
While we're talking, while waiting for some more questions, I'm going to ask you, because you talk about a nice long life. And it does seem 40 years ago, everyone thought Ronald Reagan was old. And by today's standards, it's somewhat young. We have a president who is going to be 78 years old this year. You're a relatively young man. Nancy Pelosi could be your mother. I mean, she's 81. She's old enough to be your mother, technically, right? And
I've never said that out loud.
No.
I've definitely thought it before, yeah.
Politicians seem to be much older. Here in Connecticut, we have a couple of people in their 70s representing us. Do you see... does Congress seem to be getting older to you?
I understand that that's the perception. I'm chairman of the ethics committee, and the chairs of all of the committees have a standing meeting every week, and I take a look at I observe who else is there, and there are some members who have been there for a good long time.
Yeah.
But I think we're right at the cusp of a very significant transition to a new generation of leadership, and then I think you can't imagine how quickly we will go from the perception that so much of Congress is older than you would think, to how terrific it is that suddenly there's this great new young generation of leaders.
There is a young generation of progressive Democrats out there. Back here in our own state, John Larson, who represents the first district, which is the Hartford area, is being challenged by a progressive Democrat. We all know the story about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC as she's known. Have you ever faced a threat like that? And do you see more of these threats popping up across the nation?
Yeah, I haven't had a serious primary challenge like that. Do I see more? I do. I don't think it's particularly helpful, but the fact is it's politics, and anyone's entitled to run. I'm confident that John will do well because I've worked with him for years and know what a good member of Congress he is. The irony, of course, is that some of those races that draw younger progressive candidates are against members who are pretty progressive to begin with, and you've seen, for the most part, that play out in the outcome of those elections. It's I do suspect we'll see more of it, though.
For those who don't fully understand what you do, what is the chairman of the House Ethics Committee responsible for?
The Ethics Committee is the one committee in the House that is evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans. There are 5 and 5. Every decision we make, we try to make unanimously. It's not always easy, but we always try to get there. And what we do is we enforce the House rules, the code of conduct. We try to uphold the integrity of the House. We conduct investigations. We levy punishments against members when it's appropriate. And it's a real challenge, but I'm proud of the work that we've done. Going back a few years to the Me Too movement, there are a good number of members of Congress who are former members of Congress because we took our responsibility very seriously, and they ultimately decided the only way to avoid the Ethics Committee's jurisdiction was to leave Congress. And I think there's a lot more to do, but that's the work that we do, and I think it's really important.
We've heard a lot about bipartisan friendships over the years. I know that Richard Blumenthal told me he's worked very closely with Republicans. Senator Murphy told me that his Republican partner, I guess, for lack of better words, is Senator Cassidy, I believe, and they work together to get some things done. Who on the other party do you work with to try to perhaps get a compromise going?
Well, it depends on the issue. I chair the Climate Solutions Caucus, which is the one bipartisan effort to combat climate change in Congress. And I started it with, I don't know if this is a great example as I talk about it, because I started with Carlos Curbelo, who's a good Republican from Miami who wound up losing the next election. I continued with John Rutherford from Florida, who wound up retiring. I've got a new co-chair there, but there are Republicans on that committee. The Bipartisan Task Force to Combating Antisemitism has strong bipartisan leadership. Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania is somebody who's really involved in those issues. And then on foreign affairs, I've got Chris Smith also from Foreign Affairs and Fighting Antisemitism, standing up for human rights. And then I chair the Middle East Subcommittee. So Joe Wilson is my ranking member. I work really closely with him. This is the guy who in Obama's first State of the Union address became infamous, I guess, gained some notoriety for screaming out, "You lie," during the State of the Union. He's a really decent guy. We share a lot of the same views on foreign policy. You look for people who are easy to work with, and it happens far more than you would think from the way it's covered in the press, particularly on cable TV.
We have this question from David. What is the biggest challenge, in your judgment, facing the Jewish community across America today?
Well, that's a really good question. Look, I worry, externally, I worry about the threat of white nationalism. I think not just anti-Semitism, but those white nationalists the anti-Semites who believe that our country will only succeed when it's run by white Christians. The same ideology that led to the shooting in Pittsburgh. It's a very real and serious concern. You saw it on display, frankly. The people on January 6th were literally wearing their anti-Semitism on their sleeves. on their clothes. And I'm very concerned about that and the threat that it poses to our democracy. Anti-Semitism in a country where fewer and fewer people all around the world, but in our own country, fewer and fewer people have a basic understanding of the Holocaust. So that's a concern. And then I worry sometimes.
It had a swastika on it, and right in front of the governor's mansion in 2021 in Hartford, Connecticut. And in terms of, if we go back to that insurrection, what was your situation on that day, and what did you experience?
Well, it was the joint session of Congress.
This is from Jay, by the way. I wanted to point out that's from Jay.
Okay, so it was a joint session of Congress. I was on the House floor for the start when they went through state by state to ratify the outcome of the election. They got to Arizona. There were objections, and I stayed for the beginning and then realized it was going to be going on all day. So I started heading back to my office. Along the way, we got text messages from the Capitol Police telling us there were security threats. We needed to take cover if we were in the open. We needed to get to our office, stay away from doors, windows, silence our electronics. So I hurried back to my office and took one of my staffers' cubicles. There was no one else there. One of my staffers' cubicles in the back of this dark office and stayed there for the rest of the day for another probably 6 hours, hoping that nobody was going to come to our building. No one really knew what was happening. We knew what was happening in the Capitol, but nobody knew who was roaming the halls of the office buildings. It was a terrifying experience. And as someone who has grown as close to the families from Parkland as I have, and especially the kids who were in school on February 14th, 3 years ago, it was impossible not to think about the terror that they felt when they knew there was a gunman walking the halls. We fortunately had no certainty of that, but we were all really, really concerned. It was a terrible, terrible day for me. It was a horrible day for the country.
You mentioned the Holocaust, and usually it's a statewide, state by state issue in terms of the education about the Holocaust. But as you know, we're losing Holocaust survivors every day. A few that I've interviewed in recent years have since passed, and it won't be long before we don't have any left because of just the way that life goes on. And I'm wondering what you think on a federal level can be done to educate people about the Holocaust.
Well, I was fortunate just before the pandemic. I participated in a delegation that Speaker Pelosi led, bipartisan delegation that went first to Auschwitz, and then from Auschwitz on to Jerusalem. We marked 75 years since the liberation of Auschwitz. Then we went on to Jerusalem, the Yad Vashem. Leaders from around the world gathered to condemn anti-Semitism, remember the Holocaust. And then we came back to Washington, and that next week back, the first week we were back, we voted to pass the Never Again Holocaust Education Act to provide funding to local governments to help do Holocaust education and school districts around the country. That's a role that Congress can play. I think it's a really important role. And just one last, if I can mention,
sure.
There's a Holocaust Resource Center at Nova Southeastern University here in Broward County. They have a couple of examples of the interactive displays from Spielberg's organization in Los Angeles, where you can sit and ask questions of a survivor, and they use AI, and I guess it trips the right response, and you can have a discussion with an image of a Holocaust survivor. As we look ahead, I was thrilled to see it. As we look ahead and think about the time when there are no longer survivors with us, that sort of technology and those sorts of programs, I think, are going to be critical to helping us continue to remember.
I have a question from Jeffrey Landau. Given the recent rise of anti-Semitism, what do you think is the future course, and what's the best way to be involved?
Well, I don't know that there's a future course that's been predetermined. I think it is what we choose, how we choose to react to it. And so that means being ever vigilant and always calling out anti-Semitism when we see it, recognizing that it's not a political issue and you need to be as comfortable criticizing people in your own party as you do people in another party. That the weaponization of anti-Semitism is really dangerous for the Jewish community. So I think we have to do all of that, and just in terms of what people can do, I think it's just important to be involved, to call it out when you see it, to be involved in the kinds of programs that the Federation does, and the Community Relations Council, and all the outside groups, ADL and AJC. Like there are so many groups fighting anti-Semitism that I think we should all look for ways to be involved.
I want to ask you one question about, and I meant to follow up on this in terms of the ambassadorship to Israel. As we know, every president chooses a lot of ambassadors based on how much money they donated to their campaigns. Generally speaking, it's a plum job to get put in some certain countries, but given the history with Israel, it should be a more important ambassadorship, so to speak, because this person will actually be doing quite a bit of work. Are there any names out there that you're hearing, or someone you'd recommend?
Well, there are definitely names I'm hearing. Well, Michael Adler's name had been mentioned. He's from Miami, had been involved in the Jewish community for a long time. He's going to be the ambassador to Belgium, apparently. The two names that have been mentioned a fair amount recently are Tom Nides, who was in the Obama administration. He now works, I think, for Morgan Stanley. I don't know him. I don't really know of his connection to Israel, so I'm going to reserve judgment on him. And then Robert Wexler, who's actually my predecessor in Congress all those years ago, someone else who has a deep connection to Israel. Those are the two names that I've heard most recently.
If offered the job, would you take it?
It would be hard to say no. Yeah, I can say if they, I know a little bit about how the process works, so unlikely they're going to call me unsolicited, but if they did and told me it was really important, you bet I would.
So Congressman Ted Deutch, this was very, very enjoyable. I really enjoyed talking with you. We had some great questions from our guests, and I'd like to invite you to come on my program in person. If you happen to ever be in Connecticut, would love to see you here. And please don't tell the House Speaker that I said that she was old enough to be your mother. I was just trying to do some math. As you probably can guess, there are people in Congress who are old enough to be your children, young enough to be your children also. So
yeah, I see what you're doing there, but it's too late. You've already dug that hole. Can I say one more? Can I put a, since this is the Solomon Society, do I have that right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes,
Can I just put a plug, because I love talking to federations, and there's no one shutting us off. So I'm going to say one more thing.
Go right ahead.
I may. So I want to say thanks for the opportunity. And this is Dennis, and I understand why you're such a highly decorated journalist. That was good and crisp, and that was really fun for me. So thank you very much. But I just want to say this to everyone on the Zoom who is here because you've made a commitment to the community. And I know that you know this, but this is one of the few groups who will appreciate me telling you that when I travel as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I almost always try to have some Jewish component. For those of you who are really involved, I basically create my own mini missions within my congressional delegations. And I want to mention just one because I think says everything there is to say about why everyone on this call is so committed. I did a trip to Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kazakhstan. 3 places I was fairly confident before Congress I would never visit, let alone know where they are. But we were in Kyrgyzstan, in the capital of Bishkek. And I was told that there was a Chesed center there run by the Jewish community, because they know that this is what I'm interested in. I arranged a meeting. My wife and I and our guard from the embassy went over to this senior center, this Jewish center. We met the woman who runs it, and she told us she had opportunities, very accomplished, and she had opportunities when the Soviet Union fell to move to Moscow and do all kinds of things in Russia. But this is her community. She didn't want to leave. So she runs this Jewish Center. She took us around. She showed us the room where they were teaching young Kyrgyz kids to read Hebrew. Took us to another room where they were teaching older kids about Israel. They took us to meet this group of seniors who, if you didn't know better, you would swear that you were not in Kyrgyzstan, but at Century Village in Boca Raton, because they were the same 4'8" blue-haired ladies, in this case, receiving additional benefits because their pensions were so low in Kyrgyzstan. And it was a fantastic visit. And when we left, here's why I tell you the story. When we left, the guard from our embassy, who had no connection to the Jewish community, looked at us and said, "I just really want to thank you for that." And we said, "Thanks. It's kind of you, but thank you for keeping us safe. What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I've never seen something like this before, where here we are in this remote place, literally in the middle of nowhere, and there's this whole community of kids and teenagers and seniors who are being taken care of with money that's coming from donors literally across the globe, in places like Hartford, frankly, who give to their annual campaigns, who know that money is going overseas, but will never be in Bishkek, will never have a chance to meet these families, but yet they're making these contributions anyway." He said, "I just want to thank you for that." And the little light bulb went on in my head that for all the solicitations I've ever done for Federation and for every gift I've ever made, this guard from the embassy in Kyrgyzstan summed up why we do this, because that's what the community does. We come together to help our people wherever they are, whether we see them or know them directly. We still know it's our responsibility to help take care of them. So for all of you who make these really significant gifts to the Hartford Federation, some of which goes through JDC and helps those little old ladies in Kyrgyzstan, I want to say thanks for giving me the opportunity to join you, but more importantly, thank you. Thank you for the work that you do in the community.
You were great, Congressman. Thank you so much. And thanks for the kind words.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It was really fun.
Thank you very much, Dennis and Congressman Deutch. I do want to give you some advice, though, before we get off. If you should ever have the opportunity to run for president, as I did when I was president of Solomon Schechter, I would recommend you do what I did. If you want to get a lot done and not have to work, have Robin Landau as your running mate, because she would be the best vice president ever. Okay?
That is really good advice. I might just decide it's probably more appropriate for her to just run for president then. Just a thought.
I would vote for her as well. Anyway, thank you for giving us that inside look into issues that affect our community and how they're playing out in Congress and the presidency. Federation's business partners provide important support for our programs like this one. So more of our gift goes back into direct services for our community. You can see on the screen all of our business partners. If you have a business, I encourage you to talk to Simi and have your business recognized as well. These businesses really help us so much. I also want to thank my partners, Ron, Coleman, Eric, Simi, for their partnership in our men's philanthropy efforts, and Carolyn Gitlin, the Federation Chair of the Board, and Dana Keller, the Annual Campaign Chair, and Women's Philanthropy Chair, Judy Schlossberg, for being such amazing partners. But I also would be remiss if I didn't mention all of our Federation staff members who you cannot believe how much work they do that goes into a night like this, and they get it down to the last detail. I have to thank Haley and Brooke and Susanna and the rest of the development team for their marketing efforts. And of course, I want to thank each and every one of you for attending tonight, supporting our men's engagement programs this past year. I am so proud of the groundswell of excitement that we've created in this just 1 year, the young men we've introduced to Federation, the new members that we have had join us in these meetings, the new Solomon Society members who have donated so generously, and of course, all of you who have helped our Federation meet their goal or on pace to meet our goal in a very, very, very challenging time. When we started men's engagement a year ago, one common thread was said by all people that I spoke to. We want to be a brotherhood, but we want to work towards a common goal. Something that we could be proud of. Something that we could put our stamp on like the Lions do. And our initiative we chose was called Dignity Grows for Men. Our efforts this year will provide basic necessities for men in our community who need our help. Our packing event for Dignity Men will be May 10th at Solomon Schechter Day School. This is a really special opportunity to help our neighbors in need. Anyone volunteering can be assured that we will adhere to social distance rules. Therefore, attendance will be limited, but don't let that stop you from joining us. We have plenty of room. Thank you so much again for attending. Stay well and stay tuned because our efforts have just begun. Now that we can be physically together, we have some very big plans. Not going to tell you what they are, but our congressman was just the first of many big things that are going to happen in the next year. So I'm just going to say good night and next year in Jerusalem. Thank you.